On today's show, we have our guest, David Goa, and he's going to be talking about some of his experience doing volunteer work in the prison systems. David Goa?
All teaching, I've taught all my adult life. All teaching is a real privilege. To have an opportunity to engage, usually the young, in opening up the world of learning. It's a remarkable privilege. In my experience, nowhere is that privilege more vivid than in the prison system.
Go on.
So for a few years, we've had a project, we call it the Ephesus Project, named for that incident in the life of the Apostle Paul,
Yes.
where the Apostle Paul was in prison in Ephesus and wrote to his friend Timothy and said to him, and above all, Timothy, bring the books. So we had an opportunity to begin to do this work of post-secondary education in prison. And I have primarily worked, for a long period of time, we worked only one-on-one in maximum security prison. So you're with one particular incarcerated person. You're there to lead them into the kind of reflection and the kind of reading and writing that hopefully will animate their life. And I have found it really quite extraordinary to see what emerges from this. All of the people that I and my colleagues have taught, I would say that they've all turned a corner before they come to us. Many people in prison suffer from mental illness. They have psychiatric problems. And certainly in a few cases that I'm familiar with, once those get sorted out and they get some help with them, sometimes that makes a huge difference, just as it does with all forms of mental illness. In some cases, it makes a huge difference. And in other cases, they never get over it, but in some cases, it makes a huge difference.
What kind of mental illness have you seen people in prison have? Like, what are the common disorders you have seen over the years?
I don't inquire into this. It's not something you do when you teach in prison. But there are obviously issues with anxiety, violence, attachment disorder, schizophrenia, multiple personalities. I mean, the whole gamut is there. And so in the particular situation that we are in, usually the inmate would have to request an interest in doing some university studies. They would request that to their parole officer, because everybody in prison has a parole officer. And then that person would assess them to see if they thought they were ready for this. And if they did, they would then come to us and ask if we would be willing to have a conversation with this person and see if they would be suitable. So what I did is I developed this little course, which I call On Being Human.
Okay.
It seems to me to be a good thing to do with people in prison. Good thing to do with people in corporations, maybe, as well. So it consists of a series of readings, beginning with the ancient world, beginning with the book of Genesis. I particularly love the Joseph story, because Joseph was in prison as well. But all of the tales of the patriarchs are lovely to do. They open up many, many profound questions. A bit of Plato, a bit of Aristotle, all the way down through modern literature. So they do this reading, and of course, in all cases, they'd never had a chance to do this before. This is like opening a whole new world to them. And then we spend time talking and thinking together. And what happens, and it happens quite quickly, because of what we're looking at here. Great literature, great philosophical literature, great poetry, all of it is great in part because it opens up profound human questions. And these men, none of them are Presbyterian Sunday school boys. They've done very, very serious stuff. And they've turned a corner. They have recognized what they've done, recognized it in many cases very, very deeply, very profoundly.
I'm just going to say, make a statement, and just tell me if you think the statement is correct. Did they fall through the cracks of our social system, or did they have to find their bottom before they changed? Like in addiction, it said some people have to find their bottom. Some people disagree with that statement, but what's your take on that? Do some people, did the state or did our social programs fail them, or did they have to learn from their own mistakes to find their bottom before they're willing to make changes in their life? What's been your experience working with these individuals on that?
Well, I think there's a variety of things going on, and each one of them is particular. The little bit that I know about them, because I do not inquire, I listen to whatever extent they wish to speak about their past. My sense is not, certainly the ones that I have been privileged to speak to, in those cases, it's not that there's been a failure in social programs. I think that's a major issue within our society, but that's not what I've seen here. What I've seen here is certain kinds of psychological challenges and difficulties, which has got them into bad company.
Okay.
Where they, and I mean perhaps even more profound than that, a deep sense of anomie, a deep sense of meaninglessness emerged in their life at probably a fairly young age in some cases. And this led them to seek, what's amazing that we as human beings, if we do not have something meaningful to live for, we will find it on the dark side.
Very true.
Because the dark side is also meaningful in a disordered way. So I think that is what has happened often in these cases. But what in the ones that we've been privileged to teach, they have turned, by the time we see them, they have turned a remarkable corner. And I would say that within a very short period of time, they really turn prison into a monastery.
Okay.
That is, they step aside of the politics of the prison. As you well know, most prisons are largely run by gangs. In fact, we organize prisons around gangs in Canada. We keep them separate from each other in different units. Because that's where power is really exercised in its most negative forms. It's also the case that some people, I think, ought to become part of the prison system on the correction officer side. Some of them are wonderful people, excellent people. But I think it's also likely the case that some of them could just as easily be on the inside as well as the outside. They have the same kind of passions. So prisons are very dangerous places. And also, prisons are curious in our society. They're kind of a curious institution because there's not any public eyes on it. So in a way, a prison becomes a fiefdom of the warden. And so the culture of the prison, to whatever extent that can be influenced by the warden, it's going to be influenced by the warden. And we see that. We've seen prisons change cultures with the changing of the warden. What is remarkable about these students is to see them turn it into a monastery, to see them bring their own deep concerns, their own deep challenges into dialogue with the great tradition of ideas that we have in the West, both with the religious traditions Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and also with the civil society, with the great tradition of thinking about what the civil life is like. So it is a extraordinary thing to witness I wouldn't call it growth of intellectual curiosity, I would call it explosions. It's an explosion of curiosity about ideas. And so many of them have come after meeting with them just a little bit, come into our conversation, into our teaching sessions, and said with so much passion, why hasn't anybody told me that this is our culture? Why haven't I been told that Plato thought about justice this way? Why haven't I been taught the Joseph story to see what it means to handle your difficulties with your brothers better and to do life-giving things instead of death-dealing things? So it's a remarkable privilege to spend time with, in my case, with people that have been incarcerated for very lengthy periods of time, 15, 20 years, who have had very, very checkered pasts, and to see them come to what the Apostle Paul calls the newness of mind, to see them dealing with the world entirely differently from the way they did before. And those people, those men, then really become a new kind of person within the prison system itself. I don't know a lot about this because I, of course, am only there to teach them. But judging from the little bit I've heard, they affect their environment in a quite marked way because they respond differently than before. They no longer react, which is the way they describe how they behaved before. They now are capable of responding and helping others navigate the world in much healthier ways.